Imagine achieving the impossible, a black woman, daughter of immigrants, who overcame every barrier to become the CEO of a tech giant, a shareholder in an airline, and yet, in a single moment, be reduced to nothing because of the color of her skin. What would you do if, after years of struggle, someone tried to strip away your place based on pure prejudice? This is the story of Emily Johnson, and it starts with a gut punch that will make you question everything. On a first-class flight, platinum ticket in hand, Emily is about to face an injustice so blatant it will test her strength, and ignite a spark that will change the world around her. Emily Johnson, 38, settled into seat 2A in the first-class cabin of Horizon Airlines, the soft leather of the seat a small luxury after an intense week of negotiations in New York. The flight to San Francisco was more than a trip home, it was a moment to plan the future of her company, Tech Vision, which was on the verge of closing a $50 million contract with Horizon itself. As a platinum member, with miles racked up from years of international flights, that seat was more than a perk, it was a symbol. Every detail of her journey screamed resilience. Born in a working-class Chicago neighborhood, daughter of a janitor and a bus driver, Emily had defied the odds, expectations, and skeptical glances to get where she was. Her open laptop displayed complex spreadsheets, the coffee served by the flight attendant still steamed, and the gentle hum of the engine seemed to cradle her confidence. Until everything changed. Rachel Carter, the flight attendant, approached with a smile that felt too rehearsed, her eyes darting away from Emily's as if afraid to meet her gaze. "Ms. Johnson, there's an issue with your reservation," she said, her voice laced with a hesitation that clashed with the firmness of her words. Emily raised an eyebrow, her sharp mind already sensing something off. "An issue? I'm a platinum member, I confirmed this seat at check-in. Here's my ticket." She opened the Horizon app on her phone, the QR code glowing on the screen like undeniable proof. Rachel hesitated, casting a quick glance toward the back of the cabin, where a white woman, dressed in a designer blazer and sparkling jewelry, watched with a mix of impatience and disdain. It was Susan Bennett, a frequent flyer, known in Horizon's corridors for her wealth and expectation of VIP treatment on every flight. "I'm sorry, but we need you to give up seat 2A, Rachel insisted, her tone now sharper, as if Emily were an intruder. "It's a matter of priority." Priority? Emily felt her blood heat up, but she kept her composure. She was no stranger to microaggressions, the subtle comments in meetings, the looks that questioned her presence in elite spaces, but this was different. It was overt, humiliating. "Priority?" Emily repeated, her voice calm but cutting. "I'm a shareholder in this company. I own 25% of Horizon's stock. Care to explain what kind of priority trumps that?" Other passengers began to notice the tension. Some looked away, uncomfortable, others watched with morbid curiosity. Rachel, visibly nervous, called over the supervisor, Michael Evans, a middle-aged man with a plastic smile that seemed trained to diffuse conflicts without resolving them. "Ms. Johnson, let's keep this civil," he said, as if Emily were the source of the problem. "Ms. Bennett is a long-time customer, and she expects seat 2A. It's a matter of logistics." Logistics. The word hit like a slap. Emily realized what was happening. This wasn't about rules or reservations. It was about who they thought belonged in that space, and to them, it wasn't her. "I'm not giving up my seat," Emily stated, crossing her arms, her voice steady as granite. "I have every right to be here, and you know it." Michael's tone shifted, now tinged with condescension. "Please, ma'am, don't make this difficult. We can offer you a seat in business class, with a compensation voucher." The offer was an insult disguised as generosity, and Emily felt a surge of indignation rise in her chest. Business class. She hadn't worked tirelessly, faced prejudice and barriers, to be downgraded on a whim. As the argument escalated, a passenger a few rows back, Lauren Mitchell, reached for her phone. A freelance journalist with a keen nose for injustice, Lauren knew she was witnessing something bigger than a fight over a seat. Discreetly, she started recording, capturing Emily's upright posture, Michael's veiled arrogance, and Susan's superior gaze, now approaching, muttering something about service standards. The video, still unknown to Emily, was about to become the spark of a revolution. Emily locked eyes with Michael, then Rachel, and finally Susan, who now stood beside the supervisor, as if she owned the plane. "You're making a mistake," Emily said, each word heavy with the determination forged from years of facing systems that tried to diminish her. "This seat is mine. And I'm not going anywhere." The cabin fell silent, the air thick with the promise of a confrontation that went beyond this flight. Emily knew she wasn't just defending a seat, she was defending her place in the world. And as Lauren kept recording, the stage was set for a battle that would shake Horizon Airlines and beyond. Susan Bennett was used to getting her way. At 52, the heiress to a real estate fortune saw the world as a chessboard where her moves always won. On the Horizon Airlines flight, Seat 2A in first class wasn't just a seat, it was a symbol of her status, an unquestionable right she believed she'd earned with endless miles and generous tips. As she watched Emily Johnson, a black woman occupying her seat, Susan felt a familiar irritation, one she'd never admit was anything more than a matter of fairness. To her, Emily didn't belong there, no matter what her ticket said. And Susan was determined to fix this mistake, whatever it took. Temporarily seated in 2B, Susan crossed her arms, her gold bracelet glinting under the cabin's soft lighting. She'd flown with Horizon for over a decade, spending tens of thousands of dollars on first-class tickets. In her mind, this made her more than a passenger, she was a VIP, someone who deserved deference. The fact that Emily, a woman Susan instinctively judged as out of place in that elite space, was in 2A felt like a personal affront. She didn't know Emily was the CEO of TechVision or that she held 25% of Horizon stock. And, frankly, she didn't care. To Susan, the hierarchy was clear, she was at the top, and people like Emily, regardless of their achievements, were not. Susan summoned Rachel Carter, the flight attendant, with a snap of her fingers that echoed in the quiet cabin. "Rachel, darling, this is unacceptable," she said, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. "I always get 2A. You know that. Why is this woman in my seat?" Rachel, already nervous about the situation, lowered her voice. "Ms. Bennett, we're handling it. The passenger has a valid reservation, but we're trying to sort it out." Susan raised an eyebrow, clearly displeased. "Sort it out faster. I didn't pay a fortune for this flight to sit next to someone who clearly doesn't belong here." The words slipped out with a ease that revealed years of untouched privilege, a world where her whims were law. As Rachel stepped away to fetch the supervisor, Michael Evans, Susan shot a glance at Emily, who remained calm, typing on her laptop as if the storm around her was just a breeze. This irritated Susan even more. Who was this woman, so confident, so composed, defying what Susan saw as her inalienable right? She leaned slightly into the aisle, her voice low but loud enough for Emily to hear. "Some people just don't know their place," she muttered, adjusting the silk scarf that completed her flawless look. Emily, catching every word, didn't turn her head, but her fingers paused on the keyboard for a brief second, the only sign the comment had hit her. Michael Evans arrived, his professional smile still plastered on, but with a glint in his eyes that suggested familiarity with Susan. "Ms. Bennett, we'll take care of this right away," he said before turning to Emily with a far less friendly tone. "Ms. Johnson, as we've explained, we need you to give up the seat." Susan watched, pleased, as Michael reinforced her position. She knew how the game worked. A discreet envelope with a few $100 bills had slipped into Rachel's hands on past flights, and Michael was no stranger to small favors to ensure clients like her were pampered. To Susan, this wasn't bribery, it was just the cost of keeping the world in order. But Emily didn't budge. "I'm not going anywhere," she repeated, her voice steady, her eyes locked on Michael. Susan huffed, unable to contain her frustration. "This is ridiculous," she said, now louder, drawing looks from other passengers. "I'm a diamond-level platinum customer. I deserve that seat. Who is she to think she can just take my place? The word she dripped with disdain, and Susan's tone made it clear that, to her, Emily was an intruder, someone who cheated the invisible rules of privilege. What Susan didn't know was that, a few rows back, Lauren Mitchell was still recording. Every word, every gesture from Susan, the finger snap, the know their place comment, the superior glare, was being captured. And as Susan leaned back in her seat, confident her influence would secure her victory, Emily remained unmoved, the strength in her posture defying the weight of the entitlement Susan embodied. The cabin buzzed with tension, a silent clash between two worlds, one shaped by inherited privilege, the other earned against all odds. Susan thought she was in control, but the real battle was just beginning. Rachel Carter felt the weight of Susan Bennett's gaze like an invisible chain. As a senior flight attendant for Horizon Airlines, she knew the game well. Keeping VIP customers happy was more than courtesy, it was an unspoken expectation, reinforced by years of generous tips and mutual favors. Susan, with her gold bracelet and authoritative tone, was the kind of passenger Horizon subtly but firmly instructed to prioritize. When Rachel saw Emily Johnson in seat 2A, a black woman with a confident posture and a valid platinum ticket, she hesitated. Not because she doubted Emily's right to be there, but because she knew Susan wouldn't settle for less than what she considered hers by right. And Rachel, shaped by a corporate culture that valued money and status above all, chose the path that seemed safest. "Michael, we need to fix this now," Rachel whispered to the supervisor, Michael Evans, as they stepped away from the first-class cabin to a discreet corner near the galley. Michael, with his impeccable tie and a smile that masked years of questionable decisions, nodded. I know. Bennett's one of our top clients. We can't let her walk away unhappy." He cast a quick glance at Emily, who sat calmly typing on her laptop, oblivious to the conspiracy forming around her. "And this Johnson, who does she think she is, anyway? Platinum or not, she's not one of our regulars." What Rachel and Michael didn't mention, but both knew, was that Susan's priority wasn't just based on her flight history. Over the years, Susan had cultivated a relationship with Horizon's crew, often slipping discreet envelopes of cash or offering favors, tickets to exclusive events, reservations at high-end restaurants, in exchange for preferential treatment. Rachel had pocketed a few $100s on previous flights, and Michael, as a supervisor, reaped even bigger perks. It was a quiet but well-oiled system, where the right customers were rewarded, and others, like Emily, were conveniently overlooked. "I checked her reservation," Rachel admitted, lowering her voice. "It's legit. She's platinum, Michael, and, apparently, a shareholder. That could be trouble." Michael frowned but quickly brushed it off. "Shareholder or not, she's not Bennett. We'll offer her an upgrade next time, a voucher, whatever. But 2A goes to Susan. That's how it works." He straightened his posture, already preparing to return to the cabin with the authority of someone who knew the system had his back. Back in first class, Rachel approached Emily again, her tone now more insistent. "Ms. Johnson, as the supervisor explained, we need you to give up the seat. It's company policy." Emily, who had heard the same spiel minutes earlier, looked up from her laptop, her expression a mix of disbelief and controlled outrage. "Policy? Show me that policy. Because as far as I know, my ticket is just as valid as anyone else's here." Rachel faltered, without a ready answer, and glanced at Michael, who was approaching with an air of impatience. Michael, confident in the invisible hierarchy that had always favored him, decided to ramp up the pressure. "Ma'am, we're trying to be reasonable. Ms. Bennett has priority due to her long-standing customer status. If you don't cooperate, we'll have to involve security." The threat hung in the air, and for a moment, the cabin fell silent, passengers exchanging uneasy glances. Emily felt the weight of those words, but also something more, the certainty that this wasn't just about a seat. It was about a system that, without saying it outright, decided who deserved respect and who could be discarded. Meanwhile, Susan Bennett, still in 2B, watched the scene with a satisfied smile, confident that Rachel and Michael would do what she expected. She didn't know that, a few rows back, Lauren Mitchell was still recording, her phone capturing every glance, every word laced with subtext. Rachel and Michael, caught in their complicity, didn't realize they were fueling a machine of privilege that was about to crumble. To them, it was just another day following Horizon's unwritten rules. But for Emily, it was the start of a fight that would expose those rules to the world, and tear them apart. Captain Robert Hayes strode through the curtain separating the cockpit from first class with the bearing of a man who rarely had to justify his decisions. At 55, with decades of experience piloting Horizon Airlines jets, he was the ultimate authority on board, his presence commanding instant silence in the cabin. Tall, with graying hair and an immaculate uniform, Robert carried the confidence of someone who knew his word was law in the air. When Michael Evans, the supervisor, called him over the intercom to report the situation with Emily Johnson, Robert didn't hesitate. To him, it was straightforward: a passenger was causing trouble, and his job was to maintain order, especially for clients like Susan Bennett, whose influence he knew well. "What's the problem here?" Robert asked, his deep voice cutting through the cabin's murmur. He didn't look at Emily right away, instead turning to Michael, who quickly summarized the situation with a subservient tone. "Ms. Johnson is in seat 2A, which was reserved for Ms. Bennett, a priority customer. She refuses to give it up." Robert finally turned to Emily, his eyes sizing her up with a mix of disdain and impatience. He didn't see a CEO, a major shareholder, or a woman who had earned her place against all odds. He saw a threat to the order he and Horizon were used to upholding. "Ma'am, let me be clear," Robert said, crossing his arms. "This flight isn't taking off until you cooperate. If necessary, we'll call airport security to remove you." The threat was blunt, and Robert's tone left no room for negotiation. Emily, who had maintained her composure until now, felt a surge of indignation mixed with a chill down her spine. She knew, in that moment, she wasn't just dealing with a dispute over a seat, it was a display of power, a reminder that, to people like Robert and Michael, her presence in first class was an anomaly to be corrected. "Captain Hayes," Emily replied, her voice steady but laced with calculated calm, "my ticket is valid, I'm a platinum member, and I own 25% of this company's stock. If anyone's breaking rules here, it's not me." She held up her phone, the QR code still visible, like armor against intimidation. But Robert didn't flinch. He didn't even glance at the ticket. "That's not relevant now," he cut in, his tone authoritative. "My priority is the safety and comfort of the passengers, and you're causing a disturbance." The word disturbance echoed in Emily's mind like an insult. She, a woman who had built a career facing subtle and overt prejudice, was now reduced to a disturbance for simply demanding her right. Susan Bennett, still in seat 2B, watched with a barely perceptible smile, pleased with the captain's intervention. Rachel Carter, standing beside Michael, kept her head down, but her eyes betrayed the unease of someone who knew the situation was spiraling out of control. Michael, emboldened by Robert's presence, added, "Ms. Johnson, no one wants this to end badly. Just get up, grab your things, and we can find you another seat." The offer, cloaked in conciliation, was just another attempt to force Emily to yield. But she didn't move. "You're making a serious mistake," she said, her eyes fixed on Robert. "You think you can bully me out of my place? That's not happening." Emily's firm, defiant tone made Robert hesitate for a brief second, but he quickly regained his composure. "Last chance, ma'am," he said, pointing to the intercom. "I don't want to call security, but I will if I have to." The threat loomed like a dark cloud, and the other passengers, now utterly silent, watched the scene with a mix of discomfort and curiosity. Some whispered, others looked away, but no one intervened, except Lauren Mitchell, who, hidden a few rows back, kept recording every word, every gesture. Her phone captured Robert's authoritarian stance, Michael's complicity, and Emily's unwavering resolve. In that moment, Emily felt the weight of years of battles against systems that tried to diminish her. She knew giving in would mean admitting her presence there was less legitimate, that her success, her ticket, her shares in Horizon meant nothing against the raw power of Robert and the corporate machine he represented. "Do what you think you need to do, Captain," she said, crossing her arms, her voice as sharp as a blade. "But no, this doesn't end here." Robert exchanged a glance with Michael, who nodded, as if confirming they were on the right track. But as the captain prepared to take the next step, he had no idea that Lauren's video was about to turn this moment of abuse of authority into an earthquake that would rattle Horizon Airlines and expose the underbelly of its privilege-driven system. Emily, steadfast in seat 2A, was more than a passenger, she was a force no one there was prepared to reckon with. Lauren Mitchell, seated in row 8, wasn't just a passenger with a phone. A freelance journalist with a sharp instinct for stories that matter, she knew what she was witnessing in Horizon Airlines first class was more than a fight over a seat, it was a glaring injustice, a raw display of discrimination. As Emily Johnson faced the pressure from Susan Bennett, Rachel Carter, Michael Evans, and Captain Robert Hayes, Lauren recorded every moment, the captain's authoritarian tone, Michael's condescension, Susan's disdain, and above all, Emily's resilience, refusing to back down. When the flight finally took off, with Emily still in seat 2A, after tense negotiations that ended without security's involvement, Lauren knew that video was dynamite. And she was ready to light the fuse. As soon as the plane landed in San Francisco, Lauren uploaded the video to her X account with the caption, "Horizon Airlines tries to kick a black woman out of first class for a white, VIP, passenger. This is unacceptable. #Justice for Emily." Within hours, the video blew up. Retweets, shares, and comments flooded the platform, with hashtags like #HorizonRacist and #EmilyJohnson gaining momentum. Outraged users shared their own stories of discrimination, while others demanded answers from Horizon. The video, just over 3 minutes long, clearly showed the attempt to remove Emily based on nothing but prejudice, and the internet didn't forgive. The next day, major media outlets, CNN, BBC, The New York Times, began covering the story. "Black CEO humiliated on Horizon Airlines flight," blared headlines, accompanied by clips of the video now circulating globally. Morning TV shows brought in analysts to discuss the incident, while late-night talk shows made biting remarks about Horizon's corporate culture. "Who is Emily Johnson?" asked an MSNBC anchor. "A woman who built an empire, but apparently isn't worthy of a first-class seat." Public pressure swelled like a tidal wave, and Horizon, caught off guard, watched its reputation begin to crumble. Emily, who initially didn't know about the video, was alerted by her assistant while still in a taxi leaving the airport. "Emily, you need to see this," her assistant said, sending the X link. Watching the footage, Emily felt a mix of anger and validation. Seeing her own experience laid bare to the world was painful but empowering. She was no longer just a passenger facing an injustice, she was the face of a larger fight. In interviews, Lauren Mitchell, now identified as the video's creator, explained her motivation. "I saw a woman being treated like she didn't belong, despite having every right to be there. I couldn't stay silent." The public outcry wasn't limited to social media. Protesters began gathering outside Horizon's headquarters in Seattle, holding signs with slogans like "End Corporate Racism" and "Horizon, Do Better." Loyal customers canceled bookings, and the hashtag Boycott Horizon gained traction. Influencers and celebrities, from Hollywood actors to civil rights activists, shared the video, amplifying the outrage. A tweet from a prominent activist with millions of followers captured the sentiment: "Emily Johnson is a CEO, shareholder, and platinum customer. If this happens to her, imagine what happens to those without her voice." #HorizonRacist. As the pressure mounted, Emily decided to leverage her platform. In an X post, she wrote, "What happened on that flight isn't just about me. It's about a system that decides who deserves respect based on skin color. I won't stay silent until this changes." The post was retweeted thousands of times, turning Emily into a symbol of resistance. The media began digging into her background, uncovering her inspiring journey, from a humble childhood in Chicago to one of the most powerful women in tech. Each new article fueled public outrage but also admiration for Emily, whose strength and dignity in the video touched hearts worldwide. At Horizon, panic was setting in. Executives huddled in emergency calls, while the PR department tried, unsuccessfully, to control the narrative. Lauren Mitchell's video had exposed not just an isolated incident but a rotten corporate culture where privilege was protected at the expense of justice. And as the world watched, Emily Johnson, still at the heart of the storm, prepared to turn this outrage into action. She knew Horizon, and everyone involved, would soon face the consequences of their choices. The morning after Flight 237 landed in San Francisco, Horizon Airlines headquarters in Seattle was in chaos. The 15th floor conference room, typically reserved for strategic presentations and investor meetings, had become a crisis command center. Senior executives, with tense faces and deep bags under their eyes, debated frantically as phones rang off the hook. Lauren Mitchell's video, now with over 10 million views on X, had unleashed a storm Horizon wasn't prepared to weather. The board of directors, led by CEO David Whitaker, knew the incident with Emily Johnson wasn't just a customer service failure, it was an existential threat to the company. Emily Johnson, the woman at the center of the controversy, was no ordinary passenger. As CEO of TechVision, she was negotiating a $50 million contract with Horizon to provide AI technology to optimize routes and enhance customer experience. Moreover, as a 25% shareholder in the company, Emily wielded influence far beyond Seat 2A. When the video went viral, she was flooded with messages, from supporters, journalists, and even other shareholders, all urging her to use her power to force change. Emily, still processing the humiliation of the flight, saw opportunity in the chaos. She didn't just want justice for herself, she wanted to dismantle the system that allowed that injustice to happen. On Monday, as protesters gathered outside Horizon's headquarters with signs demanding accountability, Emily made her first move. In a direct call with David Whitaker, she was blunt: "You have 48 hours to present a concrete plan for reparations, or I pull TechVision's contract and rally the other shareholders for an extraordinary meeting." The threat was real. Losing a $50 million contract would be devastating, but a shareholder revolt could topple Horizon's leadership. David, aware of Emily's clout, tried to placate her. "We're investigating the incident, Emily. We'll take action." But she wasn't interested in vague promises. "Investigating isn't enough," she shot back. "I want firings, new policies, and a public apology. And I want it now." Meanwhile, Horizon's financial crisis deepened. The company's stock plummeted 12% on the New York Stock Exchange in the first 24 hours after the video, with investors fearing the impact of the growing boycott. Customers canceled bookings en masse, and the #BoycottHorizon hashtag continued to dominate social media. Major corporations, which used Horizon for business travel, began suspending contracts, citing reputational concerns. One of the largest online travel agencies, TravelNow, announced it was re-evaluating its partnership with Horizon, a decision that would cost millions in revenue. The PR department, overwhelmed, issued generic statements about commitment to diversity, but each attempt to control the narrative was drowned out by public outrage. Internally, Horizon was in tatters. Lower-level employees, many of whom had witnessed or experienced the culture of favoritism toward VIP customers, began leaking information to the media. Internal documents revealed emails from managers encouraging flight attendants to prioritize high-value customers, a euphemism for wealthy, influential passengers like Susan Bennett. A former employee, in an anonymous interview with the Washington Post, described the practice as an exclusive club where the rules only apply to those who can pay. These revelations further fueled the perception that the incident with Emily wasn't an isolated mistake but a symptom of a deeply flawed corporate culture. Meanwhile, Emily became a central figure in the public narrative. In a live CNN interview, conducted by a visibly moved anchor, she spoke with a clarity that silenced even the most skeptical critics. "I wasn't just fighting for a seat," she said, her eyes shining with determination. I was fighting a system that says people like me, black, women, from where I come from, don't belong in the spaces we've earned. Horizon needs to change, or it won't survive. The interview was watched by millions, and the phrase, people like me, resonated, transforming Emily into a symbol of resistance against systemic racism. Behind the scenes, Horizon's board met in endless sessions, scrambling for a way out. Some executives pushed for a damage control approach, offering Emily financial compensation to smooth things over. Others, more realistic, recognized that Emily's power, as a shareholder and public figure, made that impossible. One board member, a woman who had supported Emily in prior negotiations, was blunt, "If we don't act fast, she'll take us down. And she has the means to do it." Emily's pressure, combined with the public uproar, forced Horizon to face an uncomfortable truth: cosmetic changes wouldn't cut it. As the crisis unfolded, Emily stayed focused. She hired a team of lawyers to explore her options as a shareholder and began coordinating with other investors who shared her outrage. At the same time, she kept in touch with Lauren Mitchell, whose courage in recording the video had given voice to her fight. Together, they knew Horizon couldn't just sweep the incident under the rug. The company was on the brink of collapse, and Emily, with her influence and resolve, was ready to ensure that its fall marked the start of something new, or the end of an era of unchecked privilege. The Horizon Airlines scandal tore through the polished veneer of the luxury service industry, exposing a rotten core. Emily Johnson's public humiliation on Flight 237 wasn't just an isolated act of discrimination, it was a symptom of a pervasive culture that prioritized wealth, status, and whiteness over justice. As the world watched the viral video of Emily's confrontation with Susan Bennett, Rachel Carter, Michael Evans, and Captain Robert Hayes, a deeper truth emerged: Horizon's VIP system wasn't an anomaly but a deliberate design, thriving on exclusion and perpetuating systemic biases. For Emily, this wasn't just about reclaiming her seat, it was about dismantling a machine that had long marginalized people like her. The flood of media coverage following the incident uncovered stories from former passengers and employees, each painting a damning picture of Horizon's operations. Leaked internal emails, first published by the Wall Street Journal, revealed a training manual instructing staff to prioritize the comfort of high-value customers, a euphemism for wealthy, mostly white passengers like Susan Bennett. The manual outlined a hierarchical system where elite clients, those with high spending histories or social influence, received preferential treatment, from seat upgrades to priority boarding, often at the expense of others. A former flight attendant, in an anonymous interview with BuzzFeed News, admitted, "We were trained to spot the right kind of passenger. It wasn't about fairness, it was about keeping the big spenders happy." Emily, now a globally recognized name, used her platform to shine a light on this culture. In a powerful op-ed published in the New York Times, she wrote, "The Horizon Airlines incident wasn't a mistake, it was a feature of a system that sees me, and people like me, as less deserving, no matter our achievements. Luxury shouldn't mean exclusion." Her words struck a chord, sparking a broader conversation about systemic bias in high-end services, from airlines to hotels and private clubs. Social media platforms buzzed with similar stories: a black executive denied a table at a Michelin-starred restaurant, a Latina lawyer overlooked for a hotel room upgrade, an Asian couple ignored by staff at a luxury boutique. The Horizon scandal became a lightning rod, exposing how deeply bias shaped the premium experience. Investigations into Horizon's practices revealed a pattern that went beyond Flight 237. Data leaked by a whistleblower showed that over 80% of first-class upgrades in the past 5 years went to white passengers, despite a diverse customer base. The company's loyalty program, though marketed as merit-based, disproportionately rewarded those who fit a specific profile: wealthy, connected, and often white. Employees like Rachel Carter and Michael Evans, conditioned by years of this culture, saw nothing wrong with bending rules for passengers like Susan Bennett, who wielded her wealth like a scepter. Captain Robert Hayes, with his unchallenged authority, reinforced this hierarchy, treating dissenters like Emily as threats to be neutralized. The public backlash grew fiercer as these revelations came to light. Activists organized protests outside major airports, demanding accountability not just from Horizon but from the entire airline industry. A Change.org petition calling for a federal investigation into discriminatory practices in luxury travel garnered over 500,000 signatures in a week. Major media outlets published exposés, with CNN airing a segment titled "The Cost of Privilege," featuring interviews with passengers who faced similar treatment. One interviewee, a black doctor from Atlanta, recounted being asked to give up a first-class seat to accommodate a more frequent passenger, despite booking months in advance. "It's not about the seat," he said, echoing Emily's sentiment. "It's about being told you don't belong." For Horizon, the financial impact was catastrophic. The company's stock fell an additional 8% as corporate clients, wary of associating with a tarnished brand, canceled contracts. A major tech firm, one of Horizon's largest partners, publicly announced it was switching to a competitor, citing ethical concerns. The board of directors, under pressure from Emily and other shareholders, scrambled to salvage the company's reputation. But their initial responses, vague promises of diversity training and a rushed apology, only fueled public anger. A viral tweet summed up the sentiment: Horizon thinks a press release can fix decades of racism. They're not sorry, they're scared. #Justice for Emily. Meanwhile, Emily plotted her next moves. As a 25% shareholder, she had the power to shape the company's direction, and she wasn't interested in superficial fixes. She convened a virtual meeting with other major shareholders, many of whom now aligned with her cause, driven by both moral outrage and fear of further financial losses. "This isn't just about one flight," Emily told them. "It's about a culture that's been allowed to rot because it was profitable. If we don't force real change, Horizon won't survive, and it shouldn't." Her words carried weight, not just because of her stake but because her story had galvanized millions. She was no longer just a CEO, she was a movement. As the crisis deepened, Horizon's leadership faced a reckoning. David Whitaker, the CEO, was grilled in a tense board meeting about why such practices had been ignored for so long. His attempts to deflect blame only underscored the company's complicity. Meanwhile, Emily's influence grew, and she knew the next step would be pivotal. With the world watching, Horizon teetered on the edge of collapse, or transformation. And Emily was determined to ensure change came, even if by force. Horizon Airlines was ablaze, and the fire could no longer be contained. Lauren Mitchell's viral video, which exposed the discrimination against Emily Johnson on Flight 237, had sparked an unprecedented crisis, with protests, boycotts, and a plummeting stock price. Public pressure, amplified by the media and Emily's clout as a major shareholder, forced Horizon to act. There was no more room for vague statements or empty promises, the world demanded real consequences. For the first time, the company had to confront the people who upheld its culture of privilege: Rachel Carter, Michael Evans, and Captain Robert Hayes. Accountability, though late, was coming with full force. On Wednesday morning, just 5 days after the incident, Horizon released a statement that shocked the industry. Rachel Carter, the flight attendant who tried to pressure Emily into giving up her seat, Michael Evans, the supervisor who reinforced the injustice with his condescension, and Captain Robert Hayes, whose threat to call security escalated the confrontation, were fired. The statement, signed by CEO David Whitaker, was direct: the actions of Rachel Carter, Michael Evans, and Robert Hayes violated Horizon Airlines' values of inclusion and respect. Their terminations are effective immediately, and we are committed to reviewing our policies to ensure this does not happen again. The announcement, broadcast live at a press conference, was accompanied by a public admission of failure, a rare move in an industry accustomed to covering up mistakes. The decision wasn't driven by altruism. Behind the scenes, Emily Johnson had leaned heavily on the board, wielding her 25% stake and the threat of pulling TechVision's $50 million contract. In a tense meeting, she was unequivocal: if Horizon wants to survive, it needs to show it's serious. Firing those responsible is the bare minimum. The board, aware that the financial and reputational crisis could lead to bankruptcy, relented. But Emily also insisted on transparency. The firings wouldn't be swept under the rug, the reasons would be public, a step toward rebuilding trust with customers, investors, and the public. The news of the firings was met with a mix of relief and skepticism. On social media, hashtags like #JusticeForEmily and #HorizonRacist continued to trend, but many celebrated the decision as a first step. A viral tweet from an activist read, "Firings are a start, but Horizon needs to do more. The whole system needs to be torn down." #RealChange. The media covered the announcement extensively, with CNN interviewing diversity experts who praised the move but warned that cosmetic changes wouldn't address the systemic issue. The New York Times published an editorial titled, "Horizon's Fall, a Step or a Smokescreen," questioning whether the firings were genuine or just an attempt to appease public opinion. For Rachel, Michael, and Robert, the firings were a devastating blow. Rachel, who had worked at Horizon for 12 years, saw her career collapse. In a statement sent to a small aviation blog, she tried to defend herself, "I was just following orders and the company's culture. I wasn't the only one." But her attempt to justify her actions only drew more criticism, with users online pointing out that her complicity helped perpetuate discrimination. Michael Evans, known for his knack for placating VIP clients, stayed silent, but internal sources revealed he was shocked by the firing, believing his loyalty to Horizon would protect him. Captain Robert Hayes, whose authority on Flight 237 was used to intimidate Emily, issued a brief statement saying he regretted any misunderstanding, a phrase widely mocked online as a non-apology. The firings had an immediate impact on public perception. Customers who had cancelled bookings began to reconsider, and Horizon stock, which had tanked, showed signs of stabilizing, though still far from full recovery. Major corporations, like TravelNow, which had paused partnerships, issued cautious statements saying they would closely monitor Horizon's next steps. But the real test lay ahead. Emily, now a central figure in the narrative, knew the firings were just the beginning. In a live MSNBC interview, she declared, "Firing a few people doesn't fix the system. Horizon needs to change from the inside out, or these terminations will just be a show for the cameras." Meanwhile, public pressure continued to shape Horizon's fate. Protesters, though fewer in number, still gathered outside the headquarters, demanding deeper reforms. Civil rights NGOs began working with Emily, offering legal and strategic support to ensure the company didn't revert to old habits. The transparency of the firings, insisted upon by Emily, set a precedent. For the first time, an airline publicly admitted that its employees acted with bias, a confession that reverberated across the industry. Other companies, fearing a similar fate, started reviewing their own policies, wary of becoming the next target. For Emily, holding Rachel, Michael, and Robert accountable was a victory, but not the end. She knew the system that enabled their actions remained intact, rooted in practices that valued profit and privilege over justice. As Horizon struggled to recover, Emily prepared her next move, determined to ensure the crisis wasn't just a moment of punishment but the start of true transformation. The world was watching, and she wouldn't let Horizon, or any other company, forget it. The dust from the Horizon Airlines crisis hadn't yet settled, but the focus now turned to the personal wreckage left by the scandal. Susan Bennett, Rachel Carter, Michael Evans, and Captain Robert Hayes, once pillars of a system that rewarded privilege and blind obedience, now faced the consequences of their actions. Lauren Mitchell's viral video, which captured Emily Johnson's humiliation on Flight 237, not only exposed Horizon's toxic culture but also turned the four into symbols of everything wrong with entitlement and complicity. Each, in their own way, felt the weight of a world that no longer tolerated their choices, and for some, the path to redemption seemed impossibly distant. Susan Bennett, at 52, was used to navigating life with the certainty that her wealth and status shielded her from criticism. Her Pacific Heights mansion in San Francisco, with its view of the Bay, had always been a sanctuary where she hosted influential friends and planned her next social triumphs. But after the scandal, her phone stopped ringing. Invitations to galas, exclusive dinners, and charity board meetings, once flooding in, dried up. The tennis club where Susan was a prominent figure, with her name etched on a donor plaque, quietly asked her to step back temporarily to avoid embarrassment. Even her personal stylist, who had fawned over her for years, cancelled an appointment with a flimsy excuse. The morning after Horizon's firings, Susan opened her living room curtains, expecting the comforting view of the Golden Gate. Instead, she saw a small group of protesters outside her property, holding signs like, "Privilege isn't a right," and "Justice for Emily." They weren't many, but their presence hit her like an invasion. Susan quickly closed the curtains, her heart racing, and called her lawyer, demanding he handle it. But the lawyer, with a carefully neutral tone, warned that any legal action would only draw more attention to her behavior on the flight. "Susan, the best thing now is to keep a low profile," he said before hanging up. Yet social ostracism wasn't the worst of it. Susan, who had built her identity around her influence, found that doors once opened automatically were now locked. A charity organization, where she chaired the board, removed her from the position after an emergency meeting, citing incompatible values. Even her adult children, living in other cities, began keeping their distance, embarrassed by headlines branding their mother the racist VIP passenger. In a tense phone call, her youngest daughter, Claire, said, "Mom, did you really think no one would notice? You humiliated that woman." Susan, for the first time, had no ready response. Alone in her mansion, she sat at the dining table, the silence of the house amplifying the reality. Her world, built on unchecked privilege, was crumbling. Rachel Carter, meanwhile, faced an even steeper fall. At 34, she had devoted over a decade to Horizon Airlines, rising from junior flight attendant to senior, with dreams of one day becoming a cabin crew training manager. Her firing, publicly announced as punishment for violating inclusion values, shattered those plans. Rachel returned to her modest Seattle apartment, where rent depended on a salary she no longer had. Her email inbox was flooded with messages from colleagues, some supportive, but most with a cautious distance, as if her stain might rub off on them. Even her best friend at work, a flight attendant named Jenna, stopped replying to texts, fearing association with the scandal. Rachel tried to defend herself, sending an open letter to a small local aviation newspaper. "I didn't do anything that wasn't expected of me by the company," she wrote. "I was trained to prioritize certain customers, and I did my job." But the letter, instead of garnering sympathy, sparked a wave of criticism. Former passengers shared stories of Rachel favoring wealthy clients on past flights, ignoring others with valid bookings. One man, in a popular blog post, described how Rachel pressured him to give up a seat for a VIP on a Dallas flight, despite his platinum status. The narrative was clear: Rachel wasn't a victim but a willing cog in the machine of privilege. With no options left, Rachel began job hunting, but the airline industry's doors were shut. Competing carriers, aware of her toxic reputation, rejected her resume without interviews. On a particularly rough night, Rachel sat on her apartment floor, surrounded by unpaid bills, and cried. She knew she'd been wrong, but the idea of facing that mistake, of admitting her actions perpetuated an injustice, was still too much. For now, she clung to anger, blaming Emily, Lauren, and even Horizon for her ruin. But deep down, a seed of doubt was sprouting, one that might, someday, force her to confront herself. Michael Evans, the 42-year-old supervisor, faced a quieter but no less devastating fall. Known for his knack for soothing difficult clients, Michael always saw himself as a problem solver, someone who kept order in the chaotic dance of international flights. His firing caught him off guard. He believed his loyalty to Horizon, years of accepting discreet bribes and prioritizing clients like Susan, made him indispensable. When the company's statement named him, he was at a coffee shop near Seattle's airport, reading the news on his phone. The barista, who knew him as a regular, shot a curious glance that made Michael shrink. Back at his suburban home, Michael faced his wife Linda's fury, who accused him of putting their family at risk for selling out for tips. The couple, reliant on Michael's salary for their mortgage and private school tuition, watched their savings dwindle. Michael tried to maintain a facade of confidence, sending resumes to other airlines and even logistics firms, but the responses were always the same: silence or polite rejections. A former colleague, in a moment of candor, told him, "Mike, no one wants to touch someone tied to this scandal. You're radioactive now." Social ostracism was equally brutal. Michael, who frequented neighborhood barbecues and golf games with aviation professionals, noticed invitations stopped coming. In a bid to clear his name, he hired a PR consultant who suggested a podcast appearance to tell his side. But the interview was a disaster. When Michael tried to justify his actions, saying he just followed company culture, the host pressed him, "But didn't you see it was wrong? A woman was being humiliated." Michael stammered, without an answer, and the interview ended abruptly. The experience left him humiliated, forcing him to face a truth he'd avoided: his complicity wasn't just a mistake, but a choice. Captain Robert Hayes, at 55, suffered the most public fall of the four. As a veteran pilot, he was a respected figure at Horizon, known for his discipline and authority. His threat to call security to remove Emily from seat 2A, captured in Lauren's video, turned him into a symbol of power abuse. The firing, announced with his full name and rank, struck at his identity. Robert, who always saw himself as a guardian of order, was now portrayed as a villain, a man who used his uniform to intimidate a black woman who had every right to be there. Back at his Tacoma home, Robert tried to cling to routine, waking early, making coffee, reading aviation reports, but reality crept in. The Horizon Pilots Association, where he'd served as a mentor, suspended him from activities, citing conduct detrimental to the profession. Longtime colleagues, who once invited him fishing, now replied to his texts with monosyllables. Even his daughter, Sarah, a college student, confronted him in a call, "Dad, how could you do that? You threatened a woman over a seat." Robert, who'd always taught his daughter to respect authority, tried to explain: it was about maintaining control of the flight. But the words rang hollow, even to him. Robert issued a brief statement through his lawyer, regretting any misunderstanding and claiming his actions were misinterpreted. The statement, published on an aviation news site, was widely mocked, with readers pointing out there was no misunderstanding in the video, just arrogance. Unable to find work in commercial aviation, Robert considered cargo airline jobs, but even those doors were closed. On a lonely night, he sat in his office, staring at a photo of his first takeoff as captain, and for the first time in decades, felt the weight of a mistake he couldn't undo. Meanwhile, Emily Johnson watched the fallout from afar, but with keen attention. As CEO of TechVision and a major Horizon shareholder, she received constant updates on the scandal's impact. The stories of Susan, Rachel, Michael, and Robert reached her through reports, articles, and conversations with board allies. For Emily, their falls weren't cause for celebration, but reflection. Each represented a piece of the system that humiliated her: Susan's privilege, Rachel and Michael's complicity, Robert's blind authority. But she also knew punishing them wasn't the end. The real challenge was transforming Horizon, and the industry, into something better. In social and professional circles, the names Susan, Rachel, Michael, and Robert became cautionary tales. Friends and colleagues shunned them, not just out of fear of association, but because the scandal exposed uncomfortable truths about the system they all, in some way, upheld. Susan, now isolated in her mansion, began to question, however reluctantly, the entitlement that defined her. Rachel, drowning in bills, faced a choice between blaming others or owning her guilt. Michael, with his family in crisis, struggled to reclaim a sense of purpose. And Robert, stripped of his pilot identity, faced an uncertain future, haunted by a decision that lasted minutes but changed his life. The world, meanwhile, moved forward. Horizon, under pressure from Emily and public opinion, prepared for drastic reforms, starting with an unprecedented 48-hour suspension of all operations, a move that signaled the seriousness of the change. But for Susan, Rachel, Michael, and Robert, ostracism was just the beginning. Their actions, exposed and condemned, marked them as relics of a time the world was determined to leave behind. As Emily planned her next steps, their downfall served as a reminder: privilege and misconduct, when challenged, don't survive the light. The Horizon Airlines crisis had reached a tipping point. The scandal of Flight 237, which exposed the discrimination against Emily Johnson, could no longer be contained by press releases or strategic firings. The company, under pressure from Emily, a major shareholder with a 25% stake and holder of a $50 million TechVision contract, faced a choice: genuine transformation or total collapse. On Friday morning, a week after the incident, Horizon announced an unprecedented decision: all operations, from domestic to international flights, would be suspended for 48 hours, starting at midnight on Monday. The goal? Mandatory anti-racism and unconscious bias training for all 12,000 employees, from ground staff to pilots, paired with structural reforms to redefine the company's culture. The suspension stunned the industry. Airlines, even in severe crises, rarely halted operations entirely. The financial and logistical costs were astronomical. Initial estimates pegged a $15 million revenue loss, not counting refunds and the logistics of rescheduling thousands of flights. But Emily, in a tense board meeting, was uncompromising. "You can't fix a broken system while it's still running," she said, her eyes locked on CEO David Whitaker. "Either we stop now and face the truth, or Horizon doesn't survive." The board, aware of Emily's clout and the still simmering public outrage, approved the measure unanimously, though some members hesitated, fearing the impact on stock prices. The training, developed with diversity and inclusion experts, was designed to be more than a PR exercise. Renowned facilitators, academics, activists, and corporate consultants were hired to lead in-person and virtual sessions across Horizon's 20 global hubs. Every employee, regardless of role, would participate in interactive workshops, case studies, and group discussions. A specific module dissected the Flight 237 incident, using Lauren Mitchell's video as teaching material, with questions like, "What would you have done in Rachel Carter or Michael Evans' place?" and "How do you spot unconscious bias in real time?" To ensure transparency, Horizon commissioned an external audit by an independent firm to evaluate the training's effectiveness and monitor its implementation. Employees would be anonymously assessed before and after sessions, with results publicly reported to demonstrate commitment. Emily, overseeing the process as a special board consultant, insisted on a critical detail: the training wouldn't be a one-off. "This is the start, not the end," she declared in a video call with facilitators. "I want every employee to leave these sessions knowing they'll be held accountable, every day, for what they do next." Beyond the training, Horizon announced sweeping structural reforms. The loyalty program, which for years favored wealthy, mostly white clients, was overhauled. The new policy prioritized objective criteria, like accumulated miles and booking status, eliminating the discretion that allowed flight attendants like Rachel Carter to favor VIPs like Susan Bennett. A diversity committee, led by an external executive with a background in social justice, was established to review all internal policies, from hiring to promotions. Horizon also launched an anonymous reporting channel, enabling employees and passengers to flag discrimination without fear of retaliation. To bolster inclusion, the company pledged to increase minority representation in leadership roles, targeting 30% within 5 years. Behind the scenes, implementing these changes met resistance. Some executives, particularly long-timers, viewed the suspension as overkill, arguing that one isolated incident didn't justify halting the business. A regional manager, in an internal meeting, questioned, "What if employees feel attacked by this training? We could lose talent." Emily, joining the meeting remotely, responded firmly, "If someone feels attacked by learning to treat people with respect, maybe they don't belong at Horizon." Her words silenced the room, but tension lingered. Lower-level employees, especially ground and maintenance staff, voiced skepticism, fearing the reforms were just a facade to appease public opinion. "I've seen companies promise change before," said a check-in agent in Chicago. In the end, it's always back to business as usual. Despite the doubts, the suspension became a landmark. At midnight on Monday, airports where Horizon operated fell eerily quiet. Departure boards, usually packed, showed only flights from other airlines. Passengers, notified in advance, received refunds or vouchers, but many chose to wait, intrigued by the promise of a new horizon. In training centers, the atmosphere was charged. In Seattle, a group of flight attendants, many still shaken by Rachel and Michael's firings, participated in an exercise simulating onboard conflicts. A young attendant, visibly emotional, admitted, "I've seen situations like Emily's happen before. I never spoke up because I thought that's just how it worked." The facilitator, an anti-racism expert, replied, "Now you know you can change that. The question is, will you?" Meanwhile, Emily worked tirelessly. Beyond overseeing the reforms, she coordinated with civil rights NGOs to ensure the changes were lasting. In a call with the president of a partner organization, she confessed, "Sometimes, I feel like I'm pushing a mountain alone." The response came swiftly, "You're not alone, Emily. The world is pushing with you." That certainty sustained her, even through sleepless nights reviewing reports and answering emails from shareholders worried about costs. The reform's impact began to show. Employees who initially resisted reported, in anonymous surveys, a new perspective on their responsibilities. A pilot, after a Dallas workshop, wrote, "I never thought about how my decisions in the cockpit could reinforce biases. Now, I see we all have a role." Customers, though frustrated by the suspension, started expressing support, with many sending messages to Horizon praising the courage to do what's right. A frequent flyer told a local news station, "If this means I'll never see someone treated like Emily again, it was worth the wait." Yet Emily knew the reform's success hinged on sustainability. Before operations resumed, she demanded a public commitment from the board. The changes would be monitored by an independent commission, with quarterly reports released to the public. At a Wednesday press conference, hours before flights restarted, David Whitaker announced, "Horizon is no longer the company it was. We're committed to being a model of inclusion, and that starts with actions, not words." Beside him, Emily, with a look of determination, added, "This is a new chapter, but not the end of the story. Horizon will be judged by what it does from now on." When Horizon's first planes took off again at midnight on Thursday, the world watched. The company, now under a global microscope, had taken a bold but fragile step. For Emily, the suspension and reforms were a victory, but also a reminder of the work still ahead. As she prepared for the next phase, a re-education program offering a second chance to people like Rachel, Michael, and Robert, she felt the weight and hope of her mission. Horizon was changing, but the real test would be turning a crisis into a lasting legacy of justice. A year after the Flight 237 scandal, Horizon Airlines was unrecognizable. Emily Johnson's public humiliation, captured in a video that shook the world, had sparked a transformation few believed possible. Under Emily's relentless leadership, CEO of TechVision, major Horizon shareholder, and now a global figure of resistance, the company emerged as a beacon of inclusion, challenging an industry long rooted in privilege and exclusion. What began as a fight for a first-class seat became a movement that redefined corporate justice, inspiring change far beyond Horizon's gates. Horizon's transformation was meticulous and multifaceted. Following the 48-hour suspension for anti-racism and unconscious bias training, the company rolled out reforms that became an industry benchmark. The loyalty program, once a tool for favoring wealthy clients, now operated with transparency, ensuring all passengers were treated equitably, regardless of status or appearance. The Diversity Committee, led by external executive Dr. Anita Patel, reviewed over 200 internal policies, eliminating practices that perpetuated discrimination. The anonymous reporting channel, initially met with skepticism, logged over 300 complaints in its first year, leading to investigations that resulted in 15 additional firings and adjustments to service protocols. Minority representation in leadership roles also grew. Within 12 months, Horizon reached 22% of executives from underrepresented groups, nearing its 5-year goal of 30%. Employees like Maria Delgado, a ground agent promoted to regional manager in Miami, became symbols of this shift. "I used to feel my accent or background held me back," Maria said at an internal event. "Now, I feel Horizon sees my value." These stories, amplified through internal and external campaigns, restored trust among customers and investors, with the company's stock recovering 90% of its pre-crisis value by year's end. Emily, however, knew internal transformation was only part of the battle. Her vision extended beyond Horizon. She wanted to reshape the entire luxury service industry. Partnering with NGOs and consumer advocacy groups, she launched the Service Equity Initiative, SEI, a coalition pressing airlines, hotels, and other high-end businesses to adopt ethical standards. The SEI published an Inclusion Code of Conduct, endorsed by 12 major companies, including 2 of Horizon's direct competitors. The code mandated regular audits, ongoing training, and diversity targets, with public certifications for compliant businesses. Horizon was the first to earn certification, a milestone celebrated at a Seattle ceremony where Emily addressed an audience of industry leaders. "This isn't the end of the journey," she said, her steady voice echoing in the packed auditorium. "Inclusion isn't a box we check and forget. It's a daily commitment, a promise that no one will be reduced to others' assumptions about them." Horizon learned this the hard way, but now we lead by example. Applause erupted, but Emily stayed focused, knowing the real test lay in continuity. Behind the scenes, she worked with Dr. Patel to establish a $10 million fund to support diversity initiatives in smaller aviation businesses, ensuring change reached beyond corporate giants. Emily's leadership reverberated beyond Horizon. Other airlines, fearing a similar fate, began revising their practices. A major competitor launched a training program inspired by Horizon's model, while a 5-star hotel chain adopted the anonymous reporting channel. Even the media, which initially treated the scandal as a fleeting story, acknowledged its staying power. A Wall Street Journal editorial declared, "Emily Johnson didn't just save Horizon, she forced an entire industry to look in the mirror." TV shows and documentaries began chronicling her journey, turning her into a cultural icon, compared to figures like Rosa Parks for her courage in challenging an oppressive system. Yet success came at a personal cost. Emily, now a public figure, faced relentless demands, interviews, speaking engagements, and shareholder meetings. Her once private life became fodder for scrutiny. In a rare moment of quiet at her San Francisco apartment, she confided in her close friend Lauren Mitchell, the journalist who recorded the Flight 237 video, "Sometimes, I feel like I'm carrying the weight of the world. I want this to be worth it." Lauren, now a trusted ally, replied, "Emily, you've already changed the world. Now let the world carry some of that weight with you." The simple but profound exchange reignited Emily's resolve. One of Emily's most unexpected legacies was the Second Chance program, which offered Rachel Carter, Michael Evans, and Robert Hayes a chance to confront their mistakes. Of the 3, Rachel was the only one to complete it, attending intensive workshops on bias and accountability. After months of reflection, she returned to Horizon in a training role, now dedicated to teaching new flight attendants to avoid her past errors. "I don't deserve automatic forgiveness," Rachel said at an internal session, "but I'm here to ensure others don't follow my path." Michael and Robert, still resistant to self-criticism, declined the program, but their stories served as reminders of complicity's cost. Susan Bennett, meanwhile, remained on the sidelines. Socially isolated, she sold her Pacific Heights mansion and moved to a smaller town, attempting to rebuild her life away from the spotlight. Rumors suggested she began volunteering, but no one knew for sure. For Emily, Susan's fall was a footnote. The real focus was on the people Horizon now served with dignity. In spring 2026, Horizon celebrated its Renewal Day, an annual event marking its transformation. Employees from all levels gathered at hubs worldwide, sharing stories of how the reforms shaped their lives. A passenger, a black man who frequently flew first class, took the stage in Los Angeles and said, for the first time, I feel I belong here. Not because I'm platinum, but because I'm human. His words, live-streamed, touched millions. Emily, present at the main ceremony in Seattle, looked out at the crowd, a mix of diverse faces, from flight attendants to executives, from passengers to activists. She thought of her mother, the cleaner who taught her never to bow her head, and her father, the bus driver who believed in second chances. Seat 2A, which once symbolized her humiliation, now represented her triumph. As she stepped onto the stage, the crowd fell silent, waiting for her words. "A year ago, I fought for my place," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Today, we fight for a world where everyone has a place." Horizon is proof that change is possible, but only if we're willing to confront hard truths. This is our legacy, not just for us, but for everyone who comes after. The applause was deafening, but Emily, with a soft smile, was already thinking about the future. Horizon was a model, but the industry, and the world, still had a long road ahead. As Horizon's planes crossed the skies that night, carrying passengers from all walks of life, Emily's message echoed. Her leadership had turned a crisis into a movement, inspiring not only Horizon but an entire industry to embrace justice and ethics. Emily Johnson's legacy, forged in outrage, resilience, and hope, was more than a story of corporate redemption. It was a call for everyone, everywhere, to fight for a world where no one is reduced to what others see.